year ago. So a year ago, that's when I had the idea to compile a poetry book to mark the 70th year of the NHS. And also lots of other people had ideas, and a lot of people made cards for their local A&E or their local hospital or local some sort of service and gave them in. And one enterprising group of people made a film, so that's what we're going to start with. A poem particularly that I like by Isabel Tannehill speaks of lifelike. My lifelike likes to play hide and seek or blind you bright days. And the National Health Service was set up to nurture and relieve suffering in everyone's lifelike, whatever their life, however they lived it. Another favourite of mine is Empty Bed. About a year ago, I opened an envelope with copperplate handwriting from Patrick Barron. I think he's likely to be contemporaneous with Harry Leslie Smith, and I do hope he gets to see the book. I suppose you could say that I am Christabel Hope Smith, but Christabel Hope Smith is more than I am. Let's take the name Christabel, most readily associated with the suffragette fighting for votes for women. Well, I'm female and fighting for a cause relating to democracy. The struggle to protect the NHS is also a struggle for democratic accountability. No one voted to replace the National Health Service with the Health and Social Care Act, which was on no manifesto in 2010. But Christabel is also the title of a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Christabel's the heroine, walking in the grove at night, thinking of her sweetheart. Her father, the Baron, is ailing and asleep in the castle. Christabel meets another woman quite alone with a very strange story, saying her name is Geraldine. Out of compassion, Christabel offers her shelter. When they get to the castle door, she has to help Geraldine across the threshold. The belief is that witches need to be invited in and cannot cross thresholds without. Geraldine, once inside, casts a spell on Christabel, who loses the power to speak of the spell. She loses the power to tell it like it is. In England, there seems to be a similar spell. Newspapers and the BBC ignore many issues of great importance to public life, and laws are made to benefit companies intent on exploitation, say of dirty gas, and cause earthquakes, which have the potential to poison land, air and water, like fracking in the Blackpool area. I'm hoping we will hear a bit more about the history of the funding in the NHS a bit later. But in the 70 years, there have never been so many groups trying to protect their services, taking recourse to judicial reviews as well as petitions, letters and demonstrations. And there have been never so many for-profit companies milking the public purse in the NHS. When I was 5, my favourite hymn went like this. Some of you might even know it as well. Jesus bids us shine with a pure, clear light, like a little candle burning in the night. In this world of darkness, we must shine, you in your small corner, and I in mine. Archbishop Sentemu had no room in his diary to award the prizes today. I invited him because NHS England NHS 70 celebration took place in the Minster. But people of all faiths need to shine lights in the darkness. Deborah Harrington from Public Matters is a shining light in her own right, and she's kindly agreed to present the prizes today. A few shining lights are depicted on the back of the programme. I hope you look them up later. We need to break the spell. And now I'd like to present the York players, who also played this cart play outside the cathedral on the real NHS birthday on the 5th of July 2018. Thank you.
Defend Our NHS York proudly presents this brief history of the NHS and the special role that York played in that history. We are now playing our part in the struggle to salvage the NHS from the pillaging and looting that threaten it today. Watch and learn.
York's history is visible.
Its buildings and its walls.
But there are other sagas that we should record.
Of York's proud contribution to the progress of the nation.
Towards universal healthcare, release from want and deprivation.
Oulham Park was the start of York's huge innovation.
Mental health care by public subscription.
But York's Quakers weren't happy. They saw lack of humanity.
And set up the retreat.
To nurse folk to sanity. To bring care and compassion to people despised.
York's son, John Snow, is our next local hero.
Cholera was rampant, but no one knew the cause. I saw it was the water. More or less invented sewers and created public health.
Now attacked by stealth.
And all this while Florence Nightingale had started a trade of training nurses to care and tend.
I wanted ladies. I couldn't pay them.
But it became a profession with an end to oppression. Oh, that's what we thought.
So, back to today. What's happening now?
A farce of epic scale. Bursaries withdrawn.
Nurses paid to learn while working on wards without pay or rewards.
And experienced staff are caught in a trap. 1% per annum pay rise for the last 8 years.
So we're thousands short of the nurses we need.
And we're stuck with a system we never agreed. So much for democracy. It's pure plutocracy.
It was York's Seabourn Roundtree who pointed the way to the welfare state we enjoyed yesterday.
He saw that 5 giants stalked our rich land.
Ignorance, squalor, disease, idleness, create want.
Rich Joseph's serious son saw poverty all round, he said.
Prosperity will follow if we spread our wealth around.
But it takes a long time for ideas to sink in.
World War II did the trick.
It was finally seeded that a fit population was desperately needed.
Beveridge took up the cry.
We must change or we die.
Then a new message ran, loud and clear.
We've all won the war. We must all share the peace.
The welfare state was conceived.
We were blitzed. We were bankrupt.
Even Churchill agreed.
But the bill was enacted.
Parliament passed it.
The
NHS
was born.
Now Bevan, the midwife we'll always remember, had many things to say.
It was a milestone in history. The most civilized step any country had ever taken. It was the first system in the world to give universal access to healthcare. No society can legitimately call itself civilized if a sick person is denied medical aid because of lack of means. The essence of a satisfactory health service is that rich and poor are treated alike. Poverty is not a disability, and wealth is not an advantage. The glory of the profession is that doctors will be able to meet a patient's needs with no financial anxiety.
Our bankrupt nation achieved all this and left bankruptcy behind.
In this, the 70th anniversary year of our National Health Service, we must all remember Nye Bevan's words.
The NHS will last as long as there are folk left with the faith to fight for it.
On the day of the launch, 94% of the population joined the NHS.
By October 1948, that had risen to 98%, where it remains today.
What's happening now? The state we're in today.
The NHS is the jewel in our crown.
Beloved of all, in country and town.
The whole world agrees it's the best scheme of all.
So why is it threatened with change that appalls?
Maggie Thatcher was the first to put in the boot to allow privateers to pillage and loot.
Domestic services were the first to go. The bugs moved in quickly. We know they weren't slow.
Then Major decreed a market system costing millions of pounds, a managerial fiefdom.
So waiting lists soared.
Till new labour restored. Better funding at last. But it came at a huge cost. PFI meant we lost.
Once again.
In 2010, we held an election.
No one won.
It was hung.
But the new coalition devised an act to sell off our assets.
To Virgin and Serco and many another.
Who still use the logo.
NHS.
Who can guess that it's no longer ours when that brave little symbol disguises
The truth.
We began our presentation with an emphasis on York. So in final culmination, it's of local things we'll talk.
We've lost Bootham Park. We're waiting to see what the outcome will be.
Whether top-dosh hotel or posh apartments for swells.
While patients have to travel more than 60 miles for care.
Archways gone, no supportive transition to free up scarce beds.
Trusts and CCGs punished for missing spending targets. Impossible to meet.
Senior staff leaving, they've had enough. So yes men move in, who won't call government's bluff.
The situation's urgent, time's running out.
We're distracted by Brexit, but we speak true.
Without our NHS,
what
will we do?
We'll pay higher taxes to keep us safe.
But rich folk with insurance will get tax relief.
While only the poorer will pay up for all.
Watch and learn. Bevan said.
The NHS will survive as long as there are folk with the faith to fight for it.
We are those folk, and we are fighting.
We all want the NHS.
In a true democracy, that should be it.
The will of the people must not be ignored.
Thank you.
With this song about the NHS, so you should have the words on your seats.
Do you want to just play?
Yeah, so I'll play the tune. Okay, you got that? Right. The
NHS belongs to us, we won't let it go. We won't let it go. We won't let it go. have only started, we have only started.
I have to say, I was so relieved Ella was the first one to say, yes, she'd like to come. So I thought, oh my God. So thank you, Ella. She's going to read her poem, Addicted.
Addicted. I will just take one. I'm just taking one. This one grew into many, many taken, many times a day. What are you talking about? You're losing me. No, I don't need this right now. Many taken, many times a day. Body becomes dependent, brain a mess. But many, many still taken, many times a day.
I've a lot to thank the NHS for, and for not, most recently for my repairs with me due to arthritis. This is called heat stroke. Summer feels my bones like an attentive doctor, moving them in ways they had lost directions for. Cradles leaden aches, harbours heat in hollows of furtively crumbling joints. Thank you.
The first half was from Mabel, forgotten her surname, Mabel Yates, who was Community Health in Leeds, the head of. She's 86 now and as doughty as ever. My wife was a community paediatrician, Jane Wynne, but she's no longer living. But this, the first half, Mabel will accept. The second half she'd never heard of before. The family planning clinic. The condoms come in 2 boxes, one with 50 and one 100. The woman is here to get a box. What size? Asked the receptionist. Oh, I don't know, said the woman. I'm not sure. She turns to her neighbour, there in support, who shakes her head. Don't ask Maisel, it's your hubby. The woman turns back to the counter. Well, he takes size 10 in children, if that's any help. Next is a lady who needs a new Dutch cap, the old one worn out. After babies every year, it has worked like a charm for more than 3. Indeed, it is the worst for wear, with multiple pinholes. I don't quite understand, says the receptionist. Oh, I fasten it to my nightie before we get into bed, explains the lady, without fail.
Now we're getting into the commended. So, Carol, would you need the lectern? Carol Bromley.
My poem's about a good friend of mine, Helen Cadbury, who died of breast cancer a year ago in York. And this is about visiting her. And I hope I've captured something of her wonderful spirit in the poem. It's called Visiting Helen in the Afternoon, in memory of Helen Cadbury. I have washed my hands before the first set of doors, sanitized them before the second. I have passed the dying, their oxygen, their drips, their hushed visitors, and found you here, still you, giddy from Oromorph. You tell me you get Byron now, and I joke that he had bowel trouble too, or was that Coleridge, though I don't feel like joking. What I feel like is hugging. What I feel like is running a mile. We play the denial game, though afterwards I wonder, was this kind of me, or cowardly? You say on steroids, the ideas for stories just keep coming, one every minute. You make notes so they don't escape. You worry that I've cycled without a helmet. I worry I may have stayed too long. You look at the patch of blue, the white clouds at the top of the window where the glass isn't frosted, and say, that's the real world, my own bit of it, everything blue and pink.
I suppose the first thing I should do, having been given such a lovely introduction by Christine, is actually tell you who I actually am, because many of you may not know. I was, for 3.5 years, part of the campaign team for the National Health Action Party, and was working with doctors and nurses who are fighting through the electoral process to try and save the NHS. That became, I can tell you, quite an exhausting process, and we finally left last year to set up our own small research organisation called Public Matters, because our focus and interest was very much in trying to unearth the reality of what's happening to our NHS. I have to say that when I walked up from the station today, I was thinking, can there be anywhere nicer to be than here today? In this beautiful library, in this wonderful city, celebrating both poetry and the NHS's 70th year. The poems in this collection are heartwarming and inspiring in their turn, and I felt privileged, Christine, to be invited to write the foreword for the book. But I know that there is a real possibility that these poems will form part of an elegy on the passing of the NHS. We are moving from an extraordinary system of care which doesn't look at your wallet or where you came from in its approach to your medical care, to one in which that will matter very much indeed. From a system of universality to a system of having to register your entitlement to that care. And from having a whole section of things removed from the NHS menu, just like currently happens with dentistry, so that you may have to choose and think about whether you can afford certain parts of that care. Although the book is full of wonderful poems, the one I like is Empty Bed, but that's because Nye Bevan is my hero. And in this poem it says, "Last night I dreamt that Nye Bevan was at my bedside. Di, he said, though that is not my name. Di, he says, I'm here to look after you, to see that you get everything you need." That's it. That's the NHS. And when we had our wonderful players telling us about the history of the NHS, there is something extra that I would like to tell you, which is that after the foment of the First World War, a global epidemic of flu which decimated communities, an appalling depression in the 1930s, far worse than anything we saw in the aftermath of 2008, and then the Second World War. The whole world was ready really for some kind of change, and certainly the developed world was looking at how it could provide care for its people. And almost every country in the world, developed country in the world, now provides universal health care, and started to do so just after the Second World War. But there was a furious argument here, and it was an argument that Bevan won, and it was Bevan. That's why he's the champion, and that's why he's my hero. Because if you look across the world, the very worst possible kind of healthcare that we can see in the developed world is clearly the United States. A purely private system where money gets you what you want as long as you've got the money to pay, and as soon as your money runs out, tough luck. And if you never have the money in the first place, well, that means no care. That is dreadful, and the mark, I'm afraid, of a truly uncivilised approach from government to their people. But in the rest of Europe, and in many other parts of the world, universal healthcare is delivered in a mixed system of private and public delivery, where different levels of co-payment and insurance still actually provide a tiered service. And that is what was wanted here, and that was what people like Churchill and even Beveridge and others were talking about. Having co-payments and insurance. But it was Bevan who fought with fury and an anger, and sometimes with language which was less than polite, to get his own way. He faced down the doctors who wanted to earn an awful lot, to carry on earning an awful lot of money. And he faced down the public, and he faced down politicians who all thought that this was a bit strange and rather, well, sounded a bit like socialism or communism or any of the other terrible things that were stalking the world at that time. But Bevan won. And the result is still today that we can have healthcare free at the point of need, but not just free. It's not just because it's free that it's worthwhile. It's what it gives us. A high standard of care that is universal, that never used to until the Immigration Act asked where you came from or how long you'd lived here. Had you been here 5 minutes or 500 years, it didn't matter. That was what our universal healthcare did. It was brilliant. It's gone now, that system, even though it still looks as though it's the same, because it's hiding behind the NHS logo. And that's what people have to start to understand, that the changes that have already happened are seismic. The system that has supported us all for 70 years is already degraded and rotten at the core because of the assault from global corporations and from politicians who have worked with those global corporations to ensure that private interests and private money is getting the benefit of those amazing values and ethos that have run that system since its inception. And so I hope these poems are not an elegy. I hope that they actually remain in a celebration, and the fighting that's going on across the country, whether it's to save your local hospital or whether it's to actually join the wider national fight to change and fight for legislation that will restore the NHS to being the NHS that we know and love and want, then, well, let's hope, keep fighting together and remember Bevan's words that were so beautifully told us by our players today. Thank you. I have the most wonderful joy of being able to present the prizes. And Simon Williams isn't here.
Well, yes, we're going to, yeah.
Yes, he's going to read his poem for us on the video.
Grandad was smelly, but in a good way. Pipe tobacco and extra strong mints. He walked with a limp, which Grandma said he got in the war, but which Grandad said he got from Grandma, cuddling him too hard. And they both laugh, but she'd look a bit sad at the same time. He was brilliant at mending punctures, whistling tunelessly as he worked, and at knowing the names of things, in the garden and on walks in the nearby woods, where he was rubbish at hide and seek. As he got older, he started to play a game where, very convincingly, he would pretend not to know who we were. And so, one by one, his memories melted away, like the seaside summer ice creams which had run down his arms as a boy, until, one bathroom morning, only an empty mirror stared back.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you so very much, Christabel, for this collection, and thank you very much for this prize. It means a lot to me. And if I may, I would just like to say one thing that has come into my mind from the poem that you read about, the empty room, Deborah, the empty bed. When I started as a student nurse many moons ago, there was always an empty bed on every ward because you always knew that you might have an emergency, you might have somebody come into that ward. In 1984, after the Griffiths report, when it became a business and those beds were marked with pound signs and they got rid of them, and those of us who were working at the time knew very well that we would end up with patients on trolleys in corridors if you got rid of the empty beds, and that's exactly what's happened. So that really resonated with me, that poem that you read. I'll read my poem that has been placed second, You Never Forget Your First Patients. Since I've written this, I've written a few more, so it's actually part of a little sequence now. You never forget your first patients. His gullet had been fried flat by radiation therapy in his homeland. His name was Hassan. He was flown to England to be mended on my second ward as a student nurse, nearly 40 years ago. He learnt the word smashing and used it for everything. Even on the night he crushed my hand, staring into my eyes, boring into his as the surgeon felt below his Adam's apple, then cut and opened his trachea under local anaesthetic. The relief was smashing. The inside of his chest was still burning, the thirst of his soft tissues unquenchable. I remember him smiling, always smiling, even when I heard him mouth smashing for the last time.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that reading the poems for the first time when I was sent them, I mean, I have tears in my eyes now, and I have tears from so many of them when I read them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Same thing applies.
Sure.
Would like you to read it?
I'd like to say thank you to Christopher and yourself. It's been a lovely day. So I suppose my poem is partly inspired by visiting elderly relatives in hospital, but it's also written in the first person, and it's kind of thinking about my own ending, my own time of illness, as we all have to face at some point. So this is called My Life Reduced to a Window. One table with a teacup, a nice view of a leafless tree. People visit with faces. People visit with white faces and mouths full of mixed up, not sure what to say. I smile in a dressing gown, most of my hair gone, serene as a vase, as they whisper outside, "Isn't she brave?" I like the remoteness of the tree, the frippery of the cup. I like that I can write my fear without spilling a drop.
And I also particularly like this poem because of the last two lines, because when the Health and Social Care Act was going through Parliament as a bill, I was writing letters, writing to MPs, writing to lords and ladies, writing in the paper, writing everywhere. And I just know I wrote my fear, and I was pleased I could do it, but I didn't spill a drop of it. So those two lines really resonate. Thank you.
I'm Jo Land. I'm chair of 999 Call for the NHS, and one of the Darlow mums who walked 300 miles from Jarrow to London 4 years ago. And I'd just like to thank Christine for, inviting me here to speak, about the NHS, on the occasion of this, the year of the NHS's 70th birthday, and it's been, a very moving event, and, it's been fantastic, and I love the play, and I love the poetry, and it's been fantastic, and it's nice to, sometimes NHS campaigning always seems like very serious and very ranty and fighty, and it's lovely to be in an environment where we think about what the NHS really means to us, and the poetry really kind of highlights the human impact that the NHS has on all of us, and it's I found the poems extremely moving. So I always just feel that we as people, as long as we transmit to people that you know, that the NHS is, you know, the bedrock of society and, you know, security in society, and we pass that on to, you know, future generations. You know, and sometimes I think younger generations, I mean, I'm kind of, well, I'm nearly 40, but and sometimes, you know, but I'm surrounded by a lot. I've gone back to university. I'm surrounded by a lot of younger people, and I do. Sometimes I wonder if, you know, they understand what the NHS means to us as a society. So we need to impress upon younger people, you know, the importance of the NHS and what it means to us, so that they will, you know, carry on the fight. And that's one thing actually I'm studying at university is, you know, how do we motivate people to carry on the fight? People who maybe feel like quite young and healthy now, but will need the NHS and they need to understand. So that is why, one of the reasons that I understand, you know, as all of you do, how important the NHS is, that when 2 years ago we realised, Nana and I realised that with the sustainability and transformation plans, you know, the nature of the NHS, which had been hacked to pieces by the Health and Social Care Act, you know, was going to be fundamentally changed again by the sustainability and transformation plans. And then, you know, we found out about the accountable care organisation contracts, which are really a fundamental attack on the principles of the NHS. They're going to mean that care is not, you know, given to people on the basis of clinical need. It's going to be given to them, you know, on the basis of financial considerations. And, you know, rather than, you know, the doctor-patient relationship that we have now, or that is already being eroded by, you know, referral centres, and, you know, by the fact that you quite often can't see the same GP twice, that is being eroded, but there's still some semblance of it. These contracts are really, you know, if they're implemented, are going to, you know, reduce all of, you know, healthcare to, you know, to an algorithm. You know, it's no longer going to be, you know, solely down to clinical judgment. It's going to be about, you know, financially, is this person worth treating? And yes, you know, the NHS has always had to manage demand to a certain extent. And, you know, it's always been the case that people got what they needed. You wouldn't necessarily, you know, get what they wanted. I mean, you know, had like, you know, I don't know, plastic surgery to make them look gorgeous, but you know, it's not really. But what I'm saying is that, you know, people under the NHS, people get what they need, not necessarily what they want, but they get what they need. In America, a lot of people are over-treated because, you know, they have insurance where, you know, the insurance company has an incentive to over-treat. But what we're going to end up here, if we've been in court this week challenging the accountable care contract. So it's now called the integrated, you know, care provider contract. You know, because, and they've changed the names, I think that will distract us from the fact that, you know, ACOs are the American model. And the plan has been, for many years now, to reduce the NHS. And Deborah was the first person that told me this, actually. Years ago, because Deborah's got a finger well on the pulse, listen to Deborah. The plan for the NHS is to, you know, is to reduce it to like a rump service that's like Medicare in the US. There will be a reduced service. Anybody tried to see an NHS dentist lately? You know, it's a reduced service. It doesn't necessarily give you everything you need, and if you know, what will happen is that people will either end up going without clinically necessary care, or that they will have to pay. You know, we're seeing that now. There's the 17 elective procedures that NHS England, you know, have consulted on, you know, doing away with them because apparently, you know, they're of limited clinical value. I mean, and one of them is, you know, carpal tunnel. I mean, I have carpal tunnel. It's not particularly bad at the moment. It's just kind of numbness and so on. But if it gets painful, you know, I hate to think what it's going to be like, you know, if I end up in pain and they won't operate on me, you know. So to say that these things have, you know, of limited clinical value is really, really ignoring, you know, the impact that these things are going to have on people's lives, and we're going to have more of them, you know, if these ICP contracts, I'm sure in a few months' time they'll come up with a new name for them, you know, but don't be fooled, because it's this same American model where it'll be a reduced service. It will not be, you know, the NHS that we know and love. It will not be universal. It will not be comprehensive. It particularly won't be comprehensive. Everybody might, you know, get a service, but, you know, it won't be. It will be a very, very short-term thinking, and, you know, it will. We're stumbling into an era of, you know, everything, you know, being, you know, driven by algorithms, and that's not right, because, you know, I'm totally, you know, technology can do some great things, but it can't be harnessed to this profit-making motive, because it, you know, it doesn't belong in the NHS. So we've been challenging at the Court of Appeal this week the ICP contracts. We didn't win our initial case, so we've been at the Royal Courts of Justice this week appealing the ruling on the integrated care provider contract. So fingers crossed we'll win. But, you know, we are battling the establishment here, so we've got to be realistic. We don't know. We might not win. But what we do know is that if we're unsuccessful in the appeal, we have to keep fighting, you know, against these contracts, because, you know, it will spell, you know, the end of the NHS as we know it if this goes ahead. And there are lots of things like these contracts that sound quite good, like integrating care. But, you know, integrating care is not inherently good, it's how you integrate care, you know. So there are things about it that sound good, but taken as a whole, you know, it spells the end of what we know as, you know, as the NHS. So it has to be resisted, and I hope you'll stay tuned. If you're on Facebook, social media, then, you know, please stay tuned for updates about the campaign, and you know, we'll keep up the fight, and I know all of you will keep up the fight. So let's fight for our NHS. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Mohammed, would you come and read yours? Andy Toogood sent a poem, and it didn't. Have you got? I'll just, before Mohammed reads that, I'll tell you about Andy. Andy sent a poem that didn't comply with the rules, but it's about working in the NHS today, and it's about mental health services. Or he put his an RM in. And I thought, well, you know, it would contrast nicely with the historic accounts that are in the book. So I've made the handy bookmark here with Andy's poem on, because, you know, he might be outsourced.
Yes.
You know, and so you can have an outsourced NHS person's poem there. So yeah, so there you go.
Thank you, Christine. First of all, apologies for being late, Graham. I'm an Indian from Batley, so I was never going to get here on time. The poem that's in the book, thank you very much for publishing it as well, is this one. It's called I Sat There That Night, and my dad's 93. I've had many nights with him. Fortunately, he's in good health at the moment, but I've had many nights with him in hospital, and this was one of those occasions. So it's called I Sat There That Night. I sat there that night in the dim light, patiently watching the patient inside. Paramedics came, handing over with aim to nurses in wait, BPs and ECGs the same. Filling forms till late, a job I hate. I'm sure the nurses do too, but pay needs a chart rate. The doctor, after a while, came with a smile. Gently spoken lady picked up Dad's file. A history, she said. I nodded my head. Chest pains I'd seen, now Dad's on a bed. I sat there that night in the dim light, scared though comforted by kindness inside. Thank you.
It's not strictly an NHS poem, it's about the time when some of the older people in your family start dropping off the perch. And the effect of my father-in-law's death and the way that the rest of the family come in and start jumping in with 2 left feet. It's called Widow. After the funeral, we pile into the little cottage. Brothers, sisters, in-laws, children, full of post-funereal bounce, keeping up appearances, the wrong sort. A dozen hale and hearty bodies standing or sitting awkwardly in a space only big enough for 2 shrunken ones. She, in her usual corner seat, clings to what dignity she can muster. There is talk of mending broken chairs, searching for lost certificates, all much too soon. And you sit casually in his chair, assuming it were vacant. In your careless way, an arm collides with his tray full of things, which, unused to such vigour, collapses noisily onto the wooden floor, causing great hilarity. Magnifying glass, screwdriver, scissors, lighter fluid, rubber bands, pipes, pouches, torch, and those multifunctional gadgets bought by children for parents whose functions have slowly withered and disappeared. A life of small things, now displayed embarrassingly where his feet used to tremble. A brother makes a show of tidying up the mess. She entreats him not to, but he insists. She says no, panic and anger in her voice. She will have plenty of time to do that. She will have time. She will have things. She will have to do. But not now. Not yet. He still remains in the corner. His remains, his stillness, scattered under his chair. Let him lie there a bit longer.
Thank you very much for coming. If you are a contributor and haven't got your contributor's copy, they're over there with golden ribbon on. And the books are a book launch price of £5 if you'd like to buy one. And now, very welcome to mingle.